Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. It's Monday, folks, and good morning. I'm going to kick off this week's episode and part 2 of my discussion with Mr. Jamie Miller with a reminder. We're only a week away from the Sevier County Republican Party reorganization meeting. It is next Tuesday, the 25th of March. On next Monday's episode, I will put out the actual time and location for the meeting, but would like to encourage every Republican living in Sevier County to make plans to attend that meeting. Given that in today's episode, the topic of the Republican Party and what leadership within it needs to be doing going forward, that also applies to the individual county parties as well. If you are unhappy with the lack of transparency of the Sevier County GOP and their apparent unwillingness to hold public meetings, this is your chance to make your voices heard. As another reminder as well, you must be considered a bona fide Republican in order to vote for the new leadership. But every Republican can show up. If you're not a bona fide Republican yet, you can still make your voices heard by demanding more openness from the elected or newly elected county executive committee. And remind them that their mission statement on their woefully Maine website states this, quote, "The objective of the Sevier County Republican Party is to elect Republicans to office while promoting the growth and acceptance of the Republican Party among all of the people of Sevier County," end quote. Now, just how can they promote the growth and acceptance of our party by only meeting behind closed doors, in addition to violating the state Republican Party bylaws? You know, a cement truck in a Trump store in downtown Sevierville during a presidential election is not promoting the growth and acceptance of the party. Our political opponents that make up the Sevier County Democrats are much more active in the community, and their growth is unmistakable. More importantly, our opponents' growth is not countered in any measurable way. That's due to the lack of action by our current, and sad to say, previous crops of good old boy network county executive committee members. Once again, show up. If you are a bona fide Republican and eligible to put your name in the hat to run for chairman, please do so. If you have not obtained your bona fide status yet, still show up. Voice your support for the changes that are necessary to ensure our county GOP fulfills its own mission statement. Now, on to today's wrap up with Mr. Miller and a sort of reintroduction. In addition to the accolades discussed in last week's introduction, he was the lead consultant for the North Carolina Republican House Caucus's successful offensive campaigns in 2010, and he is a published author in a public relations handbook through his contributions in a chapter discussing crisis communications. Jamie has been quoted in most major domestic newspapers and has been featured in numerous TV appearances, which include some appearances during live election night coverage. He has served as either a campaign manager, campaign consultant, or senior advisor for 5 statewide campaigns in the state of Florida. To find out more, please visit his website of reasonablearguments.com. The web address will be shown throughout today's episode for those followers of the show on Rumble and YouTube. Now, like most of my previous episodes, we're going to jump right into the conclusion of our discussion after the podcast intro. Also, like the previous week's show, the discussion this week will not be presented in 2 separate segments, just one continuous wrap-up of our final 30 minutes or so together. Now with that, let's take a stand in the arena with Mr. Jamie Miller this week and get on with the show. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government
as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
Because they don't see him as you know, he is the bull in the china shop and he's acting like the bull in the china shop, but it's a very disciplined messaging about it now.
It's kind of, I think it's akin to how Republicans felt about Bill Clinton going into 1996. And I know that's kind of going back a little ways, but people didn't agree. Republicans didn't necessarily agree with Bill Clinton, but the guy moved the ball down the field, and I think Americans respect that. Like, you're give somebody the ball and 4 yards ahead, 4 yards ahead, and then every once in a while you break a 20-yarder. And right now they haven't been able to stop the 4 yards ahead at all. Like they have, it's just first down after first down all the way to the end zone.
It is amazing. And Bill Clinton, he left with a super high approval rating, even after being disbarred and perjury, all that. And whatever
He left under balanced budgets because he worked with Newt Gingrich, the way Ronald Reagan worked with Tip O'Neill to try to move, that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill were more Cold War oriented, but Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich were budget oriented.
Right. So talking about the budget and money, you've been critical of IRS practices just like everybody should be. How do you think the current stance on tax policy and government spending compares to the party's historical positions?
I don't know that it's that different. Republicans have had a internal battle about which way we should go, whether it's a sales tax or a flat tax. I've advocated that our very first move, I think, can be done without congressional approval, just through maybe an executive. I don't even know if you need an executive order. I just think it needs a rule change at the IRS, which would say that if you're a W-2 employee and a W-2 employee only, meaning you don't have a side business, that the IRS sends you either a bill or refund, and you don't have to fill out a tax return unless you disagree. And so that would take the complete responsibility off the citizen. No citizen in the United States should have to worry about their freedom, whether it's financial or their personal freedom, based upon their tax return. And that responsibility should be on the government to tell us what we owe, not the other way around. Like, why do I have to tell the government what I owe? I don't go into Walmart and tell them what I owe. I don't go into any other business and tell them what I owe. I go in, I buy my stuff, they tell me what I owe, and I pay it. And so why the IRS has got this backwards is beyond me, but it's been backwards for far too long. And I think we could make that first step immediately, not by this April 15th, but we could implement that for next April 15th.
Right.
And, while we can debate whether a flat tax or sales tax or how we want to deal with any of this other stuff. But when you start talking about 80,000 additional IRS agents, that takes all of them off the table because you no longer need them. And AI would be able to do all of those things, right? Like if you're a W-2 employee, I know that when I was a W-2 employee only, 3 out of 5 times, the IRS would either send me more money or ask me for another check. And I'm like, well, I filed my taxes, and it was always 150, 180 bucks, whatever it was. It wasn't, I didn't owe them 18,000. They didn't owe me 18,000. It was some little check mark somewhere that either was checked or not checked that the computer caught. And they're like, oh, by the way, you owe an extra 180 bucks. Well, I'm not hiring an accountant for that. I'm sending the 180 bucks. And if they send me a check for 180 bucks, I'm cashing it. So the IRS can figure out 80% of what people owe. And, and if we looked at those folks and said, you know what, you no longer have the responsibility, think of just the amount of productivity that creates just from people who aren't sitting around their kitchen table for a week doing their taxes. remittances or hiring an accountant. It's bad for the accounting industry, I suppose. But
Mm.
you know,
And
most
lawyers,
most accountants don't make their money off of W-2 employees anyway.
right?
They're making it off of businesses and high net worth individuals who have complicated tax returns. So,
That would be me.
right. Well, good. I'm glad that's you. But but that's where they make their money, right? And so I don't know that it hurts the accounting industry. It may hurt like an H&R Block where people walk into a Walmart with their W-2 and say, "Hey, please file my taxes." I just want somebody else to do it as an insurance policy. You don't pay $100 or whatever it is these days to have H&R Block do that. But from just a personal freedom and from a constitutional standpoint, I think we need to make that change right away.
I used to joke that there could be two actions that would be undertaken that would radically transform the way our federal government operates. And
I
then
can't
number
hear
one
them.
was that
I can't wait to hear them.
number one, do away with federal withholding. So everybody does have to stroke a check.
I agree.
And then change tax day to the first Monday in November.
That's brilliant.
Right? Because as soon as you stroke that check to Uncle Sucker, you're
Yeah.
going to go in the voting booth the next day and get them all out.
I love that one. I love that one.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's great.
looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for the Republican Party to redefine itself? Maybe, maybe not so much redefine itself, but to become that more, hey, let's be uh, not collectivist, but let's work together better. And what pitfalls should it avoid to maintain that unity and relevance going to the 2026 midterms and then the 2028 presidential, which
And the thing about Trump is he's been popular and successful for Trump, but he hasn't always had coattails. And so, or what you and I would consider coattails. And so the 2026 election, I tend to the U.S. Senate I would call a boring election year. When you're looking at Kentucky and North Carolina as potential pickups for Democrats and Michigan and somewhere else for Republicans, it's the Senate's likely to stay in Republican control. They could lose one or two seats, um, but it's likely to stay in Republican control. The House, however, with its slim majority, but I think Americans either accept or reject Trump, 18 months from now.
mm,
And we pick, despite the gerrymandering throughout mostly Democrat states, there's probably 5 seats over in California that can be won. There's 2 or 3 in Illinois, 2 or 3 in New York, and you start going, picking yourself across the country. And I think that, the 2026 election will be a plus or minus 50 seats in the U.S. House. I mean, maybe 40. But I think you're going to see you're going to see someplace like if people are popular with Trump, there's a Democrat seat in Orlando, for instance, that can be won. There's a seat down in Palm Beach County that can be won with the right candidate. And so, so Florida, while you think, oh, well, our delegation is 2/3 Republican,
mm,
there's still probably 2 seats that could possibly be picked up. There's probably only one in Miami that Democrats can pick up
mm,
of a Republican seat. And so maybe two seats that if they have the right candidate. But, so you start looking at just how things could play out in the US House. That's going to be a lot of Trump driven.
mm,
And so I think in 2026, these factions within the Republican Party stay with Trump. In Florida, we have this other dynamic, specifically a Governor Ron DeSantis. And while
amazing.
Governor well, go ahead.
I said he's an amazing guy.
He's amazing. He's an amazing governor. He's a tone deaf politician, but he's an amazing governor. He, he only is governor because of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's endorsement. Then he turns around and runs against Trump instead of kind of keeping his powder dry. And then instead of getting in January at the height of his popularity after a historic reelection win, he waits until July until Donald Trump gets his feet underneath him. And so it's just kind of just bad political instincts, right? And so um and he keeps doubling down, like he wants to be he thinks he should be president right now. And so he comes up with these other things like, oh, I want to take over immigration in Florida. you know and that was kind of the controversy here in Florida, was that when you got down into that bill, and people love Ron DeSantis in Florida, so they're like, yeah, Ron DeSantis is doing what Donald Trump wants. I'm like, no, he's not. He's trying to take the federal mechanism of immigration away from the president and put it under the governor's office. And the legislature, which is all pro-Trump,
Mm.
is like, no, and so they got beat up in the press, because DeSantis went around and chewed them up. And the way that one person put it was, here, like one of my clients is a guy named Senator Joe Gruters, who's been with Trump, endorsed the first legislative person in the United States, first Republican leader in the United States to endorse Donald Trump in 2015. And so he's been with Trump all along. And he's like, listen, I've been with Trump. So if the governor wants to beat me up, guess what? I'm fine, because I'm going to go get on Air Force One and have a conversation with the president, you know. But there were 100 Republican legislators in Florida who endorsed Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. And Ron DeSantis turned his back on them and went around this state calling them rhinos and just the worst things. And so I think short term, he had a short term public relations win, but he did long term damage to his brand within the state of Florida and with people who he's going to need in the future if he ever wants to be president, have a successful run for president. Because, if I'm JD Vance, I call all 100 of those people and say, hey, listen,
Right.
when push comes to shove, I'm going to need you in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina, and telling people how Donald Trump, how Ron DeSantis stabbed you in the back after you supported him for president. And you have an army of 100 Florida legislators go throughout the country not on your behalf. You now have a problem, and that's just an example of 6 years of what I call tone deaf political. Now, if you want to talk about his policies, his ability to run the government, gosh, we have not had a better governor during a crisis like a hurricane.
Mhm.
The Hurricane Ian washed out the bridge to Sanibel Island, and Army Corps of Engineers said, well, we're going to have to take 6 weeks to study that, and then we're going to probably take 4 months to build the bridge. And, I guess we can maybe do a ferry service over there. And Ron DeSantis, like I was in the military. Like, we can build a bridge in 3 days. And he did. He's like, get out of my way. We're building a bridge. And he built a bridge to Sanibel Island after a disaster in 3 days. And so, when I say he is an incredible governor, incredible. So you have kind of these two, opposing forces of,
Right.
he's this great administrator. I wish he had gotten Department Secretary of Defense. At the time, I was advocating for him to get Secretary of the Navy. I
Mm.
thought that would have been a perfect fit for him and helped him launch, maybe a future presidential bid. Hegseth kind of had that little stumble in December, and DeSantis popped up as a possible replacement there, but then
Mm.
Hegseth got his feet underneath him and won the confirmation. So
Mm.
so
What
we'll
do you think
see.
about these election laws? Do you think we need I mean, because what we saw out of California, they were counting till Christmas.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think Congress can solve this right now with a congressional rule.
Mm.
And I think Congress, the U.S. House, can pass a rule, and the U.S. Senate would have to pass a separate rule,
Mm.
that if your state does not have free, fair, and transparent elections, we are not sitting any members from your state during organizational session, which means the people from your state are not allowed to vote on speaker or serve as any committee chairmanships. So, and start with free, fair, and transparent elections, you need voter ID. And so if your state does not have voter ID, we're not going to sit your members of Congress. And I think that is something that can be done without a constitutional amendment, without a whole lot of rigmarole. That can be done within House and U.S. House and U.S. Senate rules. I don't know that it ever passes, but it certainly would change voter ID laws throughout the country immediately. And the second thing is I think we should live stream everywhere ballots are stored, distributed, voted, collected, counted, and canvassed. So if you live stream in those 6 areas, you don't have problems where I could sit and watch a precinct from Sarasota, Florida, from this very computer I'm on right now. I could poll watch a precinct in South Carolina or Tennessee, and I may not know the people who are going in there, but I know darn good and well if 200 people went in there and all of a sudden 500 votes are in the box, we've got a 300 vote problem. And so you would stop any shenanigans from within the precinct, which is where I still think most of it still exists, is after the polls close, the doors get locked. Uncle Jimmy didn't come vote. I'm going to sign Uncle Jimmy's name and vote his ballot. I know how Uncle Jimmy wants to vote. And then once you kind of go down that road, it ends up being 50, 100, 200 votes. And, and that's why they wait until the middle of the night, is because they like to see the turnout from other elections. So if you have a precinct with 1,000 voters and 600 voted in your precinct, but there's 80% turnout throughout the rest of the state, you can vote 230 votes because you can get up to 83%, because we all hear on TV time and time again, every poll is plus or minus 3%, right? So you can do the equal plus 3%, and nobody's going to see it as a outlier if everybody else is 80% and I show up with 83. And so all that math is being done behind closed doors in smoke-filled rooms, and those votes happen. And so I always say that the reason why we don't catch more election fraud is because it's the one crime that if you get away with the crime, your evidence is erased.
Right.
Because once an illegal ballot is cast, it becomes a legal vote. And once it becomes a legal vote, we're never taking it out of the pile. Never. And so we're just not going to do that. And so so literally the evidence gets erased. So I think there's some things that we can do that are very common sense, that would show the rest of the world that we have free, fair, and transparent elections. And we'll hopefully implement some of those, but I think it starts with voter ID laws.
Yeah.
And you have to do away with same-day registration.
Yes. So I think with the prediction, or not even the prediction, when we just talking about the plus 50 in the 2026, that could be a good impetus for the whoever the House Speaker is to have that rule.
Right.
And, if Trump backs it,
Right.
and the president of the Senate backs it, the vice
Right.
president,
Right.
yeah, I think that could that rule change. I had never considered that, but that rule change would drastically, because then the people themselves in the states would say, okay, hey, it takes voter ID to get my vote in there. Let's do it.
Right. There's no reason not to have it. There's never,
Right.
the one example that came through this last election was a naive Chinese college student, and he was at Michigan State University, and he went down, took his college ID, picture ID, went down, registered to vote, and voted, and as a Chinese national, and he went back to his friends, and he was proud. He was proud. He was proud. Look, I voted in an American election. And he was proud. And you know what? And by God, I'm proud for him. Like, I was just, this kid was not trying to commit, quote, election fraud.
Right.
He was living the American experience, which is what we want our immigrants to do.
Mhm.
And so, and his friends were like, "You broke the law. You need to go back down there." And so he goes back down there and he is explaining this, like, I need my ballot back because I didn't realize I couldn't vote.
Mhm.
And this is a perfect example of why same-day election laws is putting too much responsibility on volunteers who happen to be working at the poll. Like we should not be asking our volunteer Americans to determine somebody's eligibility to vote. That should be done by a professional. And, somebody within an office, somebody who has a career to lose, retirement to lose, if they decide to defraud by having people register. And I'm not suggesting that the people, even the volunteers, they could have been mistrained, they could have been whatever. This is one person and one example, but I think it is a good example, a case
Right. He had
study.
a picture ID. Let's let him
Got a
vote.
picture ID. He registers to vote, speaks English, so they let him vote. But then there's a poll watcher down there, a Republican poll watcher, like he needs to get arrested. And so then they call the police. They're like, oh, so they kind of do this thing where they retain the guy, but they don't arrest him. And then, like he gets us, everybody realizes this kid was not
Not the
committing,
criminal.
he wasn't committing criminal fraud, right? Like he's kind of like, oh, I didn't realize I shouldn't jaywalk, and I'm not trying to belittle election fraud, but this is not the example of somebody being malicious about it.
Right. There
This
was
is
no intent to commit
yeah,
fraud.
this is somebody wanting to participate in the American experience um, and kind of just got caught up in, oh, I happened to break the law while I was doing it, And so I think they kind of came to an agreement, but that agreement does not include taking his ballot out of the pile.
Right. It's
Because
cast.
his
It's
ballot's
there.
in the pile because it was a legally cast vote. And so even though the person went down there and said, "Hey, I made a mistake. I should be able to withdraw my vote." No, you can't. It's already in the pile of legal votes. And so, same day registration, and certainly a valid voter ID need to be two of the things, and then live stream all those places.
I like that live stream idea too, because I mean, when you have more scrutiny, that tends to keep the criminals undercover. They don't want
Sure,
to expose themselves. So,
100%. I don't
Jamie,
know. Did you have a specific election law you wanted
no,
to
no.
talk
Well,
about? That's just kind of my broad ideas.
that was
The other
pretty
thing
good. I like
the
the
other thing,
idea of serialized special paper ballots. I definitely like that because
we can go barcode, thumbprint, whatever. I mean, we can
right.
do all that. One thing we can do, I think that will help. A lot of conservatives don't like this, but go to electronic workbooks in the precinct. So when people check in, there's not a paper, a printout, because depending on your voting system,
Mhm.
a lot of places have a printout of the voters in that precinct that actually show what their signature look like. And the signature is there to kind of be like, oh, well, that's a signature on file. So the volunteer can confirm that the signature looks similar. But that the polls close, it's dark, and now if I want to vote an extra 200 votes, I the signature's right there. Like I
Right.
can, so I can make it look like that signature and vote those ballots. And so you can't, electronic workbooks will tally the number of people who have voted, but it won't tell you who has not voted. So you no longer know if you took a break for 30 minutes, you no longer know if Uncle Jimmy showed up or not.
Okay. All right. Well, Jamie, it's been a great conversation. Why don't you tell the audience more where they can find you and how to subscribe to your Substack? And I'll have
Yeah.
links up in the description of this show.
Yeah, thank you. You can find me at reasonablearguments.com. That's mine and my wife's website. We have a podcast of that same name, Reasonable Arguments, and I have a Substack of that same name, Reasonable Arguments. I'm on Twitter at RepJam, but if you go to the website, you can find all that stuff there. I do public speaking throughout the country, so if you're looking for a public speaker, I'm happy to charge you some money to come out and speak and talk about leadership and economic development or politics, any of those types of things, current events. And, and I have the book, American Speeches That Changed History, that make great presents, but they're, it was more of a passion project than anything else. I have
Get
20
those on
speeches.
Amazon.
It is. I have 20 speeches in there from Patrick Henry to Barack Obama. So it's not a partisan book.
Mhm.
You can give it to your Democrat friends as well. And it's, I give a little introduction to each speech, and most people who have read it seem to like it. But reasonablearguments.com is the best place, kind of the wheelhouse of all of our content.
Have you thought about updating the book with since Barack?
So when you have a book that's called American Speeches That Changed History, I just felt like when I published the book, which is 2023, I think, or whatever, it was during the Biden administration when I published it, and um, I just kind of felt like there wasn't enough time from Trump's first administration or Biden's administration to include a speech that, quote, changed history. And the speech I used from Barack Obama was from his first campaign. So it was a 2000 early June of 2008 speech of which I do think is a speech that changed history. I wish he had governed to that speech,
Right.
but it was a speech he gave throughout the spring. And but I picked the speech that he gave the night that he became the first African American major party nominee for president of the United States, which I think is a historic moment.
I watched him, I think it was in 2004 or six or 2004 at was the DNC, the convention held in Boston, right?
Yeah, but he spoke. Yeah, that's what's kind of his claim. That was kind of his launching pad was the 2004 convention at John Kerry's convention. And I think you're right. I think it was Boston.
Yeah. And I saw that and I'm like, that guy is trouble. That
I'll tell you
guy.
what, I was impressed with some of our speakers in Milwaukee as well. I'd have to go back through the roster to get them, but we all saw the minister on Inauguration Day. He was probably my favorite speaker from the Republican National Convention in
Mhm.
Milwaukee this last time. He was so very dynamic and sincere and just a dynamic speaker.
And I think that's what JD Vance has going for him into the 2028. He is a very dynamic and well-spoken individual. So that's going
And
to do well.
he brings a level, he brings a level of logic from his background, right? That a lot of us who are kind of feel like we're cut from the same cloth, even if we don't have that same number of zeros in our bank account now, we all know that we kind of started with the same zero in our bank account, like JD Vance. And so there's a ton of us who do believe that, even though we've gone on to have a little bit of a better life. That my dad was a minister, my mom was a social worker, and I received free lunch at school. So I'm not a political family or anything like that. I'm just kind of, some people would say I've had a knack for
Well,
it.
again, thank you for coming on the show, and I hope to
My
hear from you
pleasure.
more in the future and see what you're going to do down there in Florida and any more consulting.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. Let me know if I can ever do anything for you.
Oh, I'm done running for office. I'm done. But thank you again for coming on the
Don't
show.
blame you. All right, thank you.
What do you think, folks? I believe that Jamie and I could come up with a myriad of solutions for not only what ails our Republican Party, but for what ails our Republic as well. Again, you can find Mr. Miller at reasonablearguments.com. Once you've landed on his website, you can find a link to his best-selling book along with numerous articles. Before I get into God's Word this week, just a bit more about the Blue Zones. An intrepid resident of the county found out a bit more about this scam that the other residents should know about. As I mentioned last week, the money to support this program comes from a grant having to deal with opiate money. Whether this grant is from the state or the federal government, it doesn't matter. It is still taxpayer money going to set up and operate this scam. If there isn't any pushback from the residents, you will see more changes to infrastructure and regulations coming to this county that we will have to directly pay for. When I attended their first public meeting, it was discovered that one of the Blue Zone employees is a former Sevier County government employee that reached out to them and invited them to come to our county to be engaged in this fraud, as well as a former city manager of Gatlinburg that the state of Tennessee directly contacted about this fraud, not the Sevier County government. Isn't that convenient, right? Also, the day following their public meeting, the group had scheduled a few study groups to dive deeper into their poop show. The people that participated in those working groups were invitation only. And let me tell you, There were plenty of socialists in that first public meeting that voiced their opinions that they are quite in favor of the county government spending our money to quote unquote take care of us. I don't know about you, but when I became an adult, I didn't look for another set of parents to take care of me. The Blue Zone Initiative is all backroom dealing to get an apathetic public's tax money to support more of their good old boy network shenanigans. That is another reason why each of you need to show up to the Sevier County GOP reorganization meeting next week so we can stop this kind of garbage from happening in the future. Now, this week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 16. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to get insight rather than silver? If we seek wisdom and understanding about the backroom deals that are robbing us of our liberty and our sweat equity, we could put a stop to it. And that is definitely more valuable than gold or silver. Until next week, folks, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.